Is recording.
Cool. Welcome everyone to the first ever virtual AklGameDev meetup. This meetup's about talking about game production, and we have a panelist of game producers here. So if you guys can give yourself a brief introduction of who you are and what you're currently doing.
Sure. I can go first if you want.
Mm.
So I'm Cass Gray. I'm the associate producer at Dinosaur Polo Club. We're working on Mini Motorways, and they released Mini Metro. Before that, I was the events manager and assistant producer at Weta Workshop. And I'm also the chairperson of the NZ GDA, which is why it says NZ GDA Board 01 under my name. But that's me.
Okay. I'll go next. I'm Calliope, Calliope writer. I am working as the game runner at Starcult, and part of my role is the production side of things. Also, don't know why my camera is changing from pink to blue, but it's fine. It's fun. And we just shipped Best Friend Forever, which is awesome. And we are now in the pre-production phase. So yeah, that's where I'm at and what I'm doing.
Michael, go for it.
Yeah. So my name is Michael. I've been in games for about 10 years, 2 as an animator and the last 8 as a producer. I produced a few titles, What Remains of Edith Finch, Free the Night for Microsoft HoloLens, and most recently Where Cards Fall for Apple Arcade. I work pretty much right today I work as a consultant, so I work with different companies to help them with specific production problems. I work pretty much any genre, but my favorite genre to work with is anything that is trying to innovate in narrative.
Okay.
And I'm James Everett. What is my official thing now? We actually still haven't figured it out. But I do design and business development and occasional bits of production for a new team called NZXR. We just started up after Magic Leap imploded around us. So we were all part of the Magic Leap Weta Workshop game shop crew, and had a good time doing that for 5 years before everything kind of went up in smoke. So 10 of us have managed to stick together to hopefully keep working out the weirdness. For the last sort of almost 3 years at Game Shop, I was officially a producer. Sort of, my job title never changed, but it was a thing. But I'm actually I'm not really a producer. I'm the person who holds things from falling apart too much, which is very different than a real proper producer. So we'll talk about that later, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that segues to the next question, though. So what exactly is game production? How does it differ from, say, project management, and how does it entail in the game industry, and when should we start considering it when it comes to, say, bigger teams or bigger project or the size of the project?
I'll be happy to answer that, Eric. I'm glad you made the distinction between production and production management. Production management is a subset of production. So to me, the role of a producer, they have 2 functions. One is to keep the team true to the vision, and the second is to manage risk. And production management that's where the kind of the scheduling and the communication and the tracking of the day-to-day comes in. Now, historically, in the 90s, the role of the producer in games was kind of at the top. So the producer kind of held the vision while the creative director was the one coming up with the vision and communicating it. That changed around the tech bubble in 2000, where production management became more prominent. So at least in indie, in my experience, the creative director is generally the one that's acting as a creative director and producer, and there's a production manager that kind of handles the day-to-day. I don't think it's a very effective way of working. I actually think a lot of problems come from that. And so the role of a producer is very much needed, and you probably don't know you need it until it's too late.
It was interesting, like what you were saying, Josh, about like what size do you need a producer at? I tend to think like, I don't know, obviously I'm biased because I am a producer, but I think you need a producer no matter what size it is. Or maybe not a producer, but someone needs to be doing production work regardless of what size, you know, the team is or what size the project. Well, no, if you get to a certain amount of people, you do need a producer, like a dedicated producer. But, you know, you need to be thinking about production right from the get-go.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Okay.
We're at Starcult, we are, you know, we change depending on what part of the project we're on, but the core team is 4 people, and I am the producer, but I'm also like audio, supplementary 3D art, marketing, lots of other stuff. But yeah, the sort of the heart of my role is being the glue, and is being the producer. And I personally don't think that I agree with Cass, obviously. I mean, you're asking a panel of producers, so we're all going to be like, oh, from the beginning, you've got 3 people on the team, you need to have a producer. But in essence, like, even if you think that you don't have a producer, someone on your team is doing production, regardless of whether you've labeled them as the producer or not. There's someone who's planning and laying out for you what people are going to do next. Even at uni, like even in uni projects, someone is producing. And
it's going to be a lot harder to introduce a producer and production work at like later in the project than it will be at the very start. Trust me. You don't want to get like 3/4 of the way through a project and then try and introduce a whole bunch of production methodologies. I've been there, and it's a nightmare.
It is.
Yeah, I also want to add to that if it's important for the producer to be in early on, because it's important for the producer to have seniority. That's the quickest way for having authority over other members of the team. By authority, I mean a positive authority. If you're coming in at the end or in the middle, it's a lot harder to gain people's trust and gain that position that you need in order to make important calls.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Looking at from like just at a scale standpoint too, I think it's absolutely the case that production happens whether you have an official producer or not. And game design honestly is the same way. You know, you can have a very small team and not have and everyone sort of contributing. And bottom line, most everybody contributes to the design process anyways. Everyone's got something to share about it. But those things have to happen. And as you start to scale up, I think the sort of the inflection point that's often looked at is about 10 people, where you need somebody whose full-time job is managing the work of those people. Because otherwise there's sort of a threshold around 8 or 10 where there are so many, like if you've got say 3 people or 4 people, you can turn around and speak to each other, and the flow of communication is very organic, happens very quickly, and that's great. Once you get, for every person you add, you think about the number of connections, possible connections in the communication structure that creates. And 10 seems to be about the magic number, where it's like there are too many interconnections for every individual to keep all of those individual connections in their head. So somebody kind of has to start doing that. And whether you want to do it or not, it's going to happen. So you might as well like front up and get in front of it. Once you start to scale out of that and get into the larger teams, so like the Ubisoft scale stuff, for example, or any of the AAA stuff, like, it's sort of like 10 people, then 25, and 25 almost to at a push, you can go to the same structure from 25 to 100, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And then past 100, a whole new structure is required. And then past about 500, another structure is required. And so like when I was at Ubisoft Toronto, we had an executive producer paired with the creative director. And that's, I think, that's been mentioned as well, is it's such an important split. It's such a thing where it's like, if you have creative and project management in the same person,
it's so bad.
One of those things is going to win. And usually the one that wins is the background they come most strongly from. So if you've got a designer doing mostly production work, it's funny how there's extra time in the schedule for those features that they like. And if you have a producer doing design work, it's interesting how quickly you can cut features if you need to make time. And so having those split as 2 individual roles is really important, because there should be, fingers crossed, a healthy tension there, you know, as
Okay.
it's the creative director's job to push as hard and as far as they can go, and it's the producer's job to go, yeah, but we still got to ship this thing. And it's, if you've got a productive conversation between those two people, that's super effective. If you've got a toxic situation between those two people, it's a really bad time for everyone. So don't do that.
That kind of like, so what I've noticed, obviously I'm the baby of the panel. Hello. But what I've noticed is that when one person is the linchpin, so like, yeah, when one person is basically having to have a war in their head about resources, time, and what's a priority, it's a recipe for disaster. So yeah, just echoing what James said, like having one person doing all of the creative and production, and like not having anyone to like kind of bounce off them, or like, you know, have a little bit of push and shove to create some very interesting dynamics about what gets made and what doesn't get made.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting point. So yeah, it is kind of true with James. That's like once you hit like past the 10 point, you definitely do need like an executive producer and a much more higher hierarchy when it comes to the point that it becomes its own production, and because it becomes its own department in a studio.
I think department happens probably around like the 25 person mark. Like you can, you know, and it's not necessarily, like I say, executive. All titles in the game industry are confusing as crap because everyone uses them differently, right? Like at some studios, producers are strictly project managers and they only worry about tracking and timesheets and all those sorts of things, and ensuring that task load is evenly spread. In other studios, you know, it's like, you know, Calliope's doing what was the list? There was like 6 things. You're right.
Definitely don't use me as an example classic, but there seems to be like a creative producer versus a very like a traditional Scrum product owner kind of, or Scrum Master even kind of person.
Exactly. There's a lot of granularity to that because, like, functionally speaking, like, I guess the important thing for any team is that, like we say, someone is doing the game production work, and at 10 people, you might not actually need a dedicated full-time producer, but what you do need is someone who is going to bring you a dog. That's really important. Come here, Moch.
That is true.
So we're just going to have a... We're just going to have a moment for, there we go. You're welcome. A little bit of face licks. And there she goes. That's all she wanted. That's fine. So where was I? Dog. Yeah, what I think that boils down to is, like, if you hit that point where you're feeling like things as a team, you feel like things are slipping through the cracks, it means there's probably not enough production oversight. And if you're, you know, like I say, you don't necessarily need a dedicated 100% of the time producer, but someone on the team, maybe they need to say 50% or 80% of my time is focused on production. And I'm going to, you know, operate in that way to make sure that we, you know, that we're all happy with the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is true. That is true. At the end of the day, you always need to have some form of joy when it comes to the work that you do. But yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So, like, don't do things that make you sad. You'll end up like me. Like,
yeah. That's one thing I will say. I've seen people, and this tends to come out, I think, of like student projects maybe a little bit more, but like people getting stuck working in production when they don't want to, they just kind of get put into that. Don't do that. If you like, I love working in production, obviously, but I've seen a lot of people who just kind of were put into that role and got stuck there and like don't enjoy it. And it's you know, it's such a fun thing to do, but only if it's what you actually want to be doing. I think it can be quite a draining thing to do if it's something that you just got stuck doing. So
I'm one of those people.
Oh no! Well, hopefully you're.
But I do enjoy it. Yeah.
But,
yeah. So I went to Meetup design school and did the game art course, and my role in teams kind of like naturally was to like, okay, like, you know, write stuff down and do the tasks and stuff. So I sort of fell into production, and then it worked pretty well with Starcult because I sort of needed to be really multidisciplined. because of how tiny the team is. You need to be able to wear a lot of hats. So I am definitely one of those people who kind of got put in production and then was like, actually, but like I really enjoy database stuff and I really enjoy people stuff. So as long as I can still be creative, it works for me.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm also the same way too when it comes to my work. So yeah. Yeah, that begs the question though. So how do you produce a game project? How will it differ from, say, the beginning, the middle, and the end? And if there's going to be some form of continuous integration, or is it just going to be that one-off project?
I want to hear from Mikhail.
Yeah, same.
So the project is generally divided into basically 4 main stages: the pre-production, the vertical slice, production, and then ABC, which is alpha beta certification. The pre-production is where you can divide these into even more granular phases, but that's basically it. Pre-production is where you're doing your planning. It's where you're figuring out what you're doing and how you're doing it. The first half is, if you're doing it right, the first half is you're figuring out what you're doing, what's important about the game, what's important to you, what's important to the team. And you're trying to prove that it's actually going to work, and you do it in a very rough way. You try to keep this part pretty loose. Production in this phase almost acts as like provides a scientific method where we try something. You know, we make sure that developers have a good hypothesis, and then we see how close we got to it via playtesting, and then we iterate. That's the first part of pre-production. The second part of pre-production is actually building the tools and figuring out how we're going to do this and how is it going to scale up. And then you go into a vertical slice phase where you take your tools, you take your processes, and you build a section of the game, or you build a slice that presents all the features that you are going to have in the game, and you bring that up to shipping quality. At this stage, basically this is your dry run. This is your dry run for production. By this stage, as a producer, you want to have a really solid plan for what you're going to do in production. And then once you hit production, you're basically making, you know, all your content, all your code, you're scaling up, and you're getting the game code locked and content locked by alpha. Alpha is all about no new features are coming in. At this point, you're really just optimizing, you're bug fixing, you're fixing glitches. And then by the end of alpha, your game is done, but still has some bugs, some performances, and then you just fix the absolute, you know, important things. You're done with that. That goes to certification. Certification is a process that the platform holder has for making sure that your game runs well on their platform. It differs with different platform holders. At this stage, you're waiting a lot, and then, you know, you get the feedback and you have to respond quickly, and then you wait a lot again. And after that you're launched. And there are games that you continue working on them after launch, but I haven't worked on those types of games. I've done updates, but I haven't worked on those kinds of games. Maybe somebody else.
Sorry, I got very excited because I'm working on one of those games now. So, you know, I'm working with Dinosaur Polo Club. We're doing, you know, they've got Mini Motorways and Mini Metro, you know, both with like ongoing games that have updates. You know, we just released an update, and it's really interesting because before that I'd come from Weta Game Shop, where we had just done the game and put it out, and James knows, and then it was out there in the world. And, you know, there was stuff that you do afterwards, but it's not really like a game as a service type thing. And so it's been really interesting going to that. And one of the things that I sort of found is one of the problems you can run into with games as a service is that it can get a little bit draining for the team because it doesn't feel like you're working on a new project necessarily. Like you're not like finishing a project and then like, oh, we're going to do, and not to say that people aren't excited to keep working on the same thing, but like it's not like, oh, we finished a project, now we're going to do like an exciting new one. So one of the things that we've sort of tried to do is to treat each update as almost as its own project. And so, you know, we go into it with a, you know, I say pre-production phase, it's not like your standard actual pre-production phase, which can be quite long, but you know, you have a pre-production exploratory phase, and then we have, you know, you have the production phase, and then, you know, you have time at the end for bug fixing, QA, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, we get to the end and we release it, and we treat that as though we were releasing, you know, another game or another project. And we found that was quite good for, like, it was good because it helped to structure the updates and plan them out a little bit easier, but it helped with team morale a little bit, I think, because it puts you in this mindset of like, yeah, we've done something, we've released something. It's not just like, okay, we did an update and we put it out. Now we're on to the next update.
Okay.
I will also point out that the structure of pre-production, production, finaling, or shipping, depending on how you break it up, is again kind of like production. Like it's kind of just what you're going to do. So it's just a question of where you're spending your time and the ratios of those things. And so being really specific about them, you know, and Mikhail laid it out really well. But I have to ask, have you ever had a project that finished pre-production was ready to go to production?
I've never done it. I've never been on
Either.
it. But just because I haven't, it doesn't mean it's not possible.
I agree with you. I believe it's possible. I've just never seen it in 20 years.
Yeah. My argument of why I haven't been part of it is because I generally get involved when the company thinks they're in production, but they actually need to start pre-production from the start.
Yeah.
I can really break down why it hasn't happened on every single project. That's something I think about a lot, because one day, mark my words, I'm going to be on a project where it's all running smoothly.
Okay.
On the point of pre-production, actually, I watched a GDC talk on it recently because I was also trying to figure out at what point is pre-production officially over. And yeah, it's called The Art of Pre-Production, and it details quite well the difference between what people think pre-production is and what pre-production actually is. So basically, you need to do a lot more planning in pre-prod than one might assume.
Okay.
Yeah, really, it is setting up those pipelines and tools to be able to go and make the game so that in production you are productive.
You're just a train.
Yeah.
Railroads. You can just
And it is, I'll tell you, like for small teams, when everything is going well and you've got everything lined up, it just like, it feels really good and the game is getting made and everything's awesome. On big teams, like on the multi-100 person teams, the amount of stuff that changes week on week is like being a game designer on one of those teams was basically running around going like, who did what to what? Because there's just so much content coming, like it was like a freight train of content just coming through, and you're just like, I'm just going to grab onto the side and hope that nobody broke my 3 C's, you know, and away you go. So it is well worth spending that time. The other one that made me twitch there, I don't know if anybody saw it, but vertical slice makes me twitch. But I come from that was the era circa 2005 to 2009 or so when we were cranking out a lot of licensed titles. The vertical slice was the thing that the axe the publisher used to hold over our head because of our vertical but the way that they used to treat vertical slices was you basically had to build the whole damn game before you could do a slice, and it was like, how about that we call that alpha, because that's what that is.
Yeah, it is essentially alpha. Yeah.
Well, it's the big difference in a vertical slice, and again, this is mostly a personal hang up around language, not necessarily the practice itself, but I think the practice of a vertical slice is that in some cases, and probably in a lot of cases, building that complete corner of a game or one level or mission or environment or whatever that thing is, that is sort of your test for whether you're done pre-production or not. because it's, if you have
Okay.
all of your tools in place and you can
Yeah.
successfully build that piece, and you, like, the purpose of that is, one, test out everything to make sure that it's doing the things you think it's going to do, and two, start getting your estimates about how long it takes to really build stuff, because you can't know how long it's going to take to make something the first time. You need to probably get a solid 3 to 8 iterations in before you can say, it consistently takes us this long to model, rig, and import a character into the engine to have it ready to go with the existing animation set, for example. But until you have done that entire process, and it is, I'm talking everything from the creative director had a really cool idea for a new character ability, the concept artist got a hold of it and was told by the creative director without mentioning to the producer that, you know, hey, I want to know about this new thing. I think this is going to be really cool. And of course, the concept artist is like, that's dope. And they dive in and they start making something cool. And then the production finds out about it and goes like, yo, where does that belong? And, you know, and so you have to chase that entire thread all the way through to, hey, this character looks amazing and runs around really well in the game, right? So it's like, what are literally every single step in that process? And what are all of the things that can threaten that? Everything from the creative director going, hey, what about this outside of the process, which again, on smaller teams, not such a big deal because the conversation can be organic. It can still be tricky, but it can happen. But on a big team, and by big, I mean like more than 10 people, if information can come from multiple directions and it isn't prioritized for people, how do they know what to respond to? And that is a huge part of the producer's job, is ensuring that those lines of communication are clear, are well understood by everyone, and are being adhered to by everyone. And when we talk about this stuff, people tend to get allergic to it. They're like, oh, it sounds kind of like the military, or very command and control. And it's like, it's really about just making sure you know what the hell is going on. And it doesn't mean that you can't go talk to so-and-so. It just means that before anyone does any work, make sure it ends up in
everyone's
part
on
of
the
the
same
pipeline
page.
was. Exactly.
I want to touch on that because that's basically what risk, that's basically the risk management. So basically when you build a game, you build a game twice. You build it once and then you build it once right.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, right? So when one tool to do that, basically there's two reasons why you get into crunch and you get into a development hell. One is you miss your pre-production deadline, and the other is you get to alpha and you think your code ready, your code complete, but you're not. So the pre-production one, that's really the tricky one. I like what you said, James, where, if your vertical slice is good, that's when you're done. But getting to that stage can often be tricky. And this is where you really want to define what your pillars are. The pillars are that's like your constitution. It needs to be, they need to be worded in a way that when somebody, especially the creative director, wants to put in a new feature, we can check it against what those pillars are, and we can really see that they fit into into as many pillars as we can. If they don't fit neatly into the pillars, it's a good argument. It's a solid argument to get that axed. And this is the way where you can kind of manage that barrage of features that can often creep up on you.
It's a great course on how to manage your creative director.
Yeah,
pull up your core pillars.
Well, it's truth though, right? Like you want them to be so invested as a director in those pillars because they should have created them with the team that when you're like, and the advantage that this is me tangenting, sorry. But the advantage of strong pillars as well is that if they're well done, they become part of the conversation amongst the team as they discuss stuff. And they're one of the challenges that you've always got because everyone on the team, if they're engaged and having a good time, has got ideas about how to improve the game. And if you did every single one of them, you'd never ship. Not all of them fit. And by fit, I mean they might not fit the game, they might not fit the schedule, they might not fit the technology, any number of things. But tech is really hard to argue with because it either works or it doesn't. On the art side, the art director is going to tell you what's up, and that's what's up. Because they can demonstrate very, very quickly to you what that final look is going to be. Final look, but you can be indicative quite quickly. Game design is a super weird one, and it's the one that is most dangerous to the schedule. But it's that conversation where if someone's saying, oh, I really want the character can currently run and jump, and I really want them to be able to fly, and then we're like, well, okay, so let's talk about how that affects level design. Let's, like that impacts lots of things, but why is flying important? And if you have a pillar that is, I don't know, this is going to be terrible. Sorry, pillars actually take a lot of time. Doing them off the top of your head is almost always a bad idea. Don't do that. So I'm going to do it anyways. But it's, the pillar is player freedom in everything, let's say. And it's like, well, flying, suits that. Versus we want to add, leg traps to the game. Well, that impinges player freedom. Is that a thing? Whatever. Those are terrible examples. I'm sorry, but you get the idea. Try to steer a barge towards. But yeah, so there's a lot of value in there, and you will get a million different takes on how to do pillars and what they are and everything else. Don't worry, that's totally fine. There's a million different ways of doing it. No one is right. The one that is right is the one that you stick to the longest. Just don't be afraid to chuck out ones that aren't working, but don't chuck them out in the middle of production. Don't like the value of having pillars there is because they're nice, big, stable things that hold up the whole game. And so if you're going to if you've got say 3 of them and you kick one leg out, well, if you kick over a 3-legged or take a leg off a 3-legged stool, what happens, right? So that they're also a useful way to go, we're deviating heavily from the pillars and you've just said you want to get rid of one. That's going to dramatically change the game. And so you kind of use that as a scale or balance. I'm all over the show. Sorry.
Oh, good stuff.
But it is funny that you mentioned that, James, because this brings insight on what on the industry that I'm usually working on, which is IT and technology. And my boss always keeps on telling me that I need to be as accurate as possible on the initial stages before going to the development team and develop the project, whether it be a web app or some form of application for the user. So I'm guessing those pillars would be just like the core mechanics of what the game should be or what the game is supposed to convey for the player.
Often, I mean, like I say, I think you're going to get very different takes on this. So like God of War, like the most recent God of War, the way that they treated their pillars was as one word, right? So they had combat was a pillar. I can't remember what they called it, but it was either fatherhood or relationship. So it was the relationship between Atreus and Kratos. And
it was fatherhood.
I can't remember what the other one was, but you might remember. But yeah, so they had those one-word pillars and then kind of like a paragraph to describe them, and Cory Barlog could just like go off about those pillars and say, combat, this is what's important about these things. On Madagascar Karts, which we did a decade ago, but basically kart racing game with the Madagascar animals, the pillars in that were ones that we used to focus the team on really core deliverables, because we had less than 12 months to release a cross-platform 360 Wii PlayStation 3 game. It was fun. 4-player kart racing split screen. It's good. But it was the smoothest production I've ever been on. We had a very, very strong producer, Jim, lovely guy. I was lead designer for it. We knew kind of what we had to hit pretty quickly. The pillar that I said, like there was 2 pillars that I remember off the top of my head, and the first one was Mad Carts never frustrates your progress. And so that was actually a direct response to Mario Kart, which always pisses me off whenever I run into a wall and just instantly stop. I'm like, this is bullshit. I don't want to do that. And kids don't like it either. And we're making a game for kids, so let's make this fast. And so that's where like the whole drifting and turbo mechanic came from, all kinds of stuff. And also just, you can mash the A button from the moment you boot the game. If you just mash the A button, you're going to get into the game. Like there's all kinds of stuff that comes out of that one pillar. And then one of the other ones was ways for every member of the family, or every member of the family can play, basically. And like we create a cooperative racing mode for that, that kind of came out of that pillar. But it was all about like figuring out how to get people in to enjoy the experience.
Okay.
This is not a talk about pillars though, other than to say that's like, those are like two divergent approaches, and neither of them is right. Both of them have clearly worked for those teams.
Okay.
Cal, do you have pillars on BFF?
Yeah.
What were they, if you don't mind sharing them?
I'll have to try and think about how we worded them, but our pillars, so we had unique selling points and we had core pillars, and sometimes I mix the two up, so I don't want to appropriate what Lucy wrote, because Lucy is the one who wrote our core pillars. But basically ours are quite clear because we have a very like very clear hybrid of our genre. So we have genre-based pillars, and then we also have pillars based on what our values were for the game. So I guess kind of like what you're saying with God of War about like the fatherhood or like relationships. So yeah, one of our pillars would have been like the wide cast of relatable characters. And yeah, I don't want to say the other ones because I'm sure that I'll word them incorrectly.
Right. So they're appropriate to the game that you're making. They're not appropriate to. They are foundational to the game. They are the game you're making, and yeah. So having those tools, and they're a tool for the whole team, from production to be able to question the decisions about why we'd be going in a certain direction, for individuals on the team to be able to hopefully internalize those pillars and understand, hey, when I'm pitching this idea, here's something I think make the game great. If they're already thinking in their head and going through the process of like applying the pillar filter or the filter of the they're going to do half the work. They're going to do the work for you, right? They're going to hopefully improve their idea before it's even brought forward, and they're going to understand where it does or does not fit and why. So that's not so much a production thing. That's more of a creative direction thing. But this is, these are the nature of this conversation, right? Like it definitely hops between those two fields because there's just so much bleed over.
Yeah, there is from the sounds of things. So yeah, and then comes the other question though: how would it differ from say any other discipline, from animation? Because with animation, there's pre-production, production, then there's stuff like post-production, and what are this game devs games have something similar to that, or because I know
from film, you mean?
Yeah, from film. Yeah. The differences between production in like say film or games.
I mean, one thing that I have noticed about studios that aren't games is that the pre-production tends to work better because, like for instance, Pixar is on like a cyclical. Like everything is working. So basically, like the animators are still working on the animation itself, while there's a bunch of creative people, whatever their titles are, working on the pre-production for the next project, so that by the time the animators are finished working on the last project, there's a whole nother animation thing to get into. Whereas often I think that game studios, we need to be a bit more collaborative about our pre-production, or like sometimes the it's kind of an ideal world if the pre-production has already been at least scoped out a bit by a bunch of people on the tail end of the other product, but we're not always that lucky.
I guess so. Yeah.
There's also games are a strange beast, right? Like we have to iterate. The analogy that's often thrown around is like movie production would be about as hard as making games if you had to invent the camera every time you walked in to start a new film, right? Which isn't quite what we do, but it's close. We certainly rely on genre conventions. We rely on things that our technology partners have provided us. Unity and Unreal have great camera systems. Why would we rewrite that? Well, if it happens to be the heart of your game is some very particular camera thing you're doing, then maybe you will, but otherwise don't reinvent that. But there's just so much about the game that you have to experiment with, right? And that's what pre-production is for. In film in particular, almost any, I almost said non-interactive media, but there are websites with lots of interaction in them that I feel are probably have similar challenges. But typically in non-interactive media, you know what you're shooting for, which is a finished, say 2 hours or 30 minutes, whatever it is. And what matters is what goes in the frame. So like, it doesn't really matter what the production, what ridiculous things the production studio did to make their pipeline to make the film happen. And it doesn't matter if it took 24 hours to render a frame, as long as they got all 1.5 million frames or whatever they needed rendered before the deadline, and they got it assembled, and they could mix it, master it, do all the rest of it, they're sweet. We're like, yo, does this jump right? And a million other things besides. So we go from the very smallest part of it, which we have to learn how to build to make the right thing for this game that we're trying to make, all the way up to what is the creative direction, the narrative direction, all those things. And there isn't a standard format for any of this stuff that makes any sense. Like movie scripts, for example, have got a level of standardization to them that's remarkable and has stuck for the better part of 30 something years.
Yes.
We have got nothing that has lasted, I think, 30 years. And the production processes that you set up, they get better over time, just like hopefully the game you're making gets better over time. So it's a hugely different space, and there's also there's so little standardization. We're all talking about production and obviously have very different perspectives and very different experiences in the space already. So that lack of standardization means that actually everything else is harder, because we all and it's why the teams that stick together the longest are the most effective teams, is because they've learned over time how to work together. They develop their processes together. The core of the Respawn team has been together since Medal of Honor at DreamWorks. Like, that core team has, from Infinity, DreamWorks through Respawn, in Infinity Ward, then Respawn. It's like there's like 20 people that have worked together for over 20 years. So there's a reason that some of those things work. Film has enough standardization in it that you can hire a director of photography and know what you're getting, more or less, as long as you've looked at a couple of their films and that they're in the same sort of space, and you've got, like, say, a focus puller that they've got a focus puller. That's a thing. That's so specific. They've got that level of granularization. We don't have that in games yet. Where we do start to see that is in the big studios, like the large AAA houses. At that point, you get into that level of specialization, although not quite. And so the internal production processes at large companies like that, you'd think they'd have a lot of things figured out after many, many years and many teams and whatever else. The reality is that every team you go to does things a little bit differently, because they have to, because every game is a little bit different. So basically everything is different. The only thing that's not is that we still have to juggle people, time, and money. That's what remains the same.
I guess, that's also that's really the case, considering that the tech industry have essentially perfected the craft when it comes to production, with the likes of Scrum iterations, as well as now recently Agile, and studios, some studios and Zed are now putting that into their production pipeline. So I guess there's like some form, there's going to be some form of standardization. It's just that it's not going to happen yet.
There's well, let's just say if we say the word agile, you're going to get 4 incredibly different responses from all of us. So, Cass, how do you feel about agile production methodologies?
I mean, agile is just a name, right? It's a name for a collection of methodologies and practices, and this is like it was one of the first things that I learned going from studying game development to actually working as a producer, because at school we got taught that there was and I understand why our teacher did this, because you need to rein people in, but like that there was a very strict way that it all had to be done, and it was like stand-ups have to be like this, and you have to do this, you have to do this, have to do this. And the first thing that I learned when I started working in games is that actually there is no one correct way to do agile. I'm sure that there is wrong ways to do agile if you get real bad, but you know,
There's a lot more wrong ways than right ways.
yeah, like the best way to do agile is to, like, if you need to start with like the standard, you know, because most people will be doing like stand-ups in the morning, you know, that kind of thing. And you know, if you want to get like a, I don't know, an agile book or a tutorial or whatever, and you want to pick out kind of those standard things, you just need to see what works for your team. You know, try doing different things. Some things aren't going to work, and that's fine. You know, just because one studio does one thing doesn't mean that your studio or your company or your team has to do the same thing and have that work for you. You know.
Yeah.
Like it's
here's
called,
a good question though.
Yeah.
Would agile be beneficial when it comes to like budding studios when, like, say, students learning at game development at AET or MDS?
I mean, like, this might just be my answer. I think so, because I think that students need that structure. Like, I think that they need, and you know, maybe this is just coming from my experience as a student, but I think it is beneficial to have someone say, you know, here are the sort of most common agile practices that are used in the games industry, and your team should be doing this, like, you know, having stand-ups, you know, doing sprint reviews, you know, structuring it in the sprint format, things like that. Because I think that the ability to go into a team and change things and try out different things is something that you learn more over time and with more experience. I think that when you start out, it is handy to have a structure that you're going into things with, because you know, you're still learning, and you want to kind of get the basics down right before you start trying to get advanced with it. And that's not to say don't, you know, if you I used to read, I mean, I still do read, like, the, you know, the Clinton Keith books and that have all the different practices. That's not to say that you can't go into those books and pick out different things you want to try. But, you know, I think it is beneficial to have that structure and keep it simple to begin with.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's also important to reflect on your process. A good time to do this is, I would say, middle of a milestone and at the end of a milestone, to see what worked, what didn't work. Constantly check in with your leads and your teams, but try not to implement things as a reaction, because I've seen studios that change the production methodology every single week, and it causes a lot of chaos. You gotta try something for a little bit. If your team isn't taking to it, try to find out why. I'll give you an example. We had, you know, we were a small team. We were tracking stuff through a spreadsheet. I'd say about half the people filled in their spreadsheet, but then we moved to a more dedicated software, like Jira, and then we started to see more people using it because they like moving the cards, and then the whole system just worked.
My feelings are that I feel like everyone who is doing production should have you can decide that you want to do something completely different, but you should probably understand Agile, if not Scrum, at a much more granular level in order to be able to understand how to iterate on it. I was feeling pretty self-conscious about my producer capabilities. So I went and did a Udemy course, and you know, go get your Scrum Master certificate, or go like there's so many things that you can do that help you see just how unstandardized things are in this industry. When you look at how software development is, and B, also give yourself like a sort of a backup in a way that you can always refer to and be like, they've done lots of tests on it and they said we should do this. So I think that, you know, why would they be doing it in software, and why can't we do it in games, and actually exploring if there is a reason why it doesn't work for the product that you're working on. And the other thing I think is that all baby producers, myself included, should have a pretty solid understanding of of like development life cycles and product life cycles. And that comes with understanding, or at least starting to study agile methodologies in general. Because I think we could learn a lot from tech still.
Yeah, it's really, it does become a pick and choose thing very quickly, but I totally agree with Cass and Cal there. Is like starting from a known position, working that process through, and like Michael says, don't change it halfway through.
Yes.
It's every change in methodology, every tool you introduce, it's like if your whole studio is on Maya and then one day you're like, okay, artists, everyone's using Max, and you like, can you imagine doing that to a studio? Like, your artists would rebel unless they all happen to love Max and want the change. But like, that would be a very calculated change to make. You wouldn't just go change it. And because the production methodology touches everyone on the team, you want to make sure that do we want to talk about how to roll out changes? We'll do that really quickly. One of my favorite concepts in change management, and I don't know exactly where this comes from, but it is used in Agile and elsewhere, is called beachheading, which means if you've got a new process you want to try, do it with the smallest possible group of people in the shortest amount of time you can, and see what happens. So ideally take one of your smaller high functioning teams that's doing well and is prepared to take a risk on something new, because doing a new production process is something new. Let them do it, let them break the crap out of it for a sprint or two, refine it with them until it feels pretty good but isn't like set in concrete, because of course it's going to change a little bit as the rest of the team starts to do that thing. But it gives you a bunch of things. It lets you test your hypothesis about whether this is actually the way to go. It lets you hopefully make that, either if the process looks like it's working, make it robust so that it can be rolled out to the rest of the team. And it gives you an example of success, because it's one of the hardest things to do to get buy-in from people, is to do something that nobody has seen work before, right? You're asking people to take something on faith that they're already feeling a little sketchy about. And if you're having difficulties in your production and it's not going very well, and you say, okay, well, tomorrow we're going to do this new thing. And you don't say, because X, Y, and Z, we've done it with this team and examples, here's the rollout plan, this is how we'll educate the team. Like, you have to go through all of those steps every time you want to make a change like that, if you want that change to stick and be effective. If you just go, we're changing to thing, go, everyone's like, what am I doing? And you've just lost 2 weeks, like, easy, and that's what happens every time you make a change like that. And I've been guilty of that. And I've on the flip side, I've done a beachheading and a slow rollout. Funny, it worked a lot better, so.
I will say, just like going back to what we were saying before about like not changing things in the middle. I understand that, like, it can, when you're introducing like different production practices and processes, you can get a lot of resistance from the team. There's always people out there who either don't like production, or they don't like production processes, because they don't
like being told what to do.
They don't like being told what to do, and a lot of the time they're like, I just want to go do the thing, I want to go program stuff, or I want to go do art, like I don't want to do all this production stuff. And it can be really easy to hear those people and go, well, this isn't working, so we're going to change it because people don't like it. The thing that I have found over and over and over again is that if you've got a bunch of people who are resistant to the changes that you've made or that you're making, most of the time, if you give it a couple of weeks, a few sprints, they will come around. And the most important thing that you can do to show that is to have data and to show them that the process is working. Like, one of the biggest ones that you always get is estimates. People, for some, I'm again biased producer. I love estimates because they let you predict what's going to happen, sort of, or predict how you're going. People don't really like doing estimates. Some people don't like doing estimates. They don't want to sit down and go, well, this work is going to take this amount of time. But if you can track those estimates, and you can come back in a sprint, 2 sprints, whatever, and you can show people, you can say, hey, here's, the data that we've gotten from the estimates, and here's how, we can predict that the rest of the sprint is going to go, or the rest of the milestone is going to go, then people will come around to it. And that's, it's not just with estimates, it's with different things. If you can show people how the process is working, then most people are going to come around to it. And some people don't even need to see the data. Some people just need to spend some time adjusting to the change. Like you need to give people time to do that. I think I've only ever seen like 1 or 2 people who just never came around to like the changes that have been made. Most of the time with if you give people time, they'll be fine with it.
Okay.
The estimates are there. This is what I would tell somebody that doesn't like to do it. They're there to make sure that you don't crunch. A lot of the crunches that I've seen comes from the people that don't cooperate with the process. And sometimes I will do a variation for a person here and there on the process. It just like sometimes it just really doesn't work. But it is part of being a professional to work inside the process that you're given, and it is really there to make your life easier.
Totally.
Just to, on that one too, just dealing with individuals, like some people struggle with certain things in ways that for any number of reasons, and it's understanding the difference between I don't like this and this literally isn't working for me because X, Y, and Z. There's many reasons that could be true. You need to dig into those reasons. I don't like this is just unprofessional behavior and doesn't give you meaningful feedback that you can action, right? Like I can't do anything with I don't like this. I'm like, what don't you like about it? Let's talk about that. If it's I'm struggling, I'm missing, like for some people in particular, spreadsheets, for example, are a really big challenge if they're not cleaned up well, because it's a wall of text when you look at it. And that is incredibly intimidating for some people, and also just hard to parse. I'm not great at parsing it once it gets, and I build stupid spreadsheets for stuff. So, and it still freaks me out. And what you've got to figure out with those folks is what specific thing is impeding you from being involved in the process. Can we create a workaround for you that's basically, can we put a wrapper around you? Can we give you some bubble wrap where you still fit in the process, but we understand how the information comes to you and gets out of you without creating basically a babysitting job for a producer? And it's really hard, right? Because you don't want to have to go, nobody wants to go to someone's desk and go, have you filed your hours yet? Have you and sit with them and help them do that and everything else. It's just a waste of everyone's time, and it's so don't do that. So instead you've got to figure out like how do you get people involved in this stuff? And for one example, I had someone on a team a long time ago where they just struggled with Jira. There was just something about that process was just so counterintuitive to them that to be fair, this is a much older version of Jira. It was kind of crap. I mean, Jira, whatever, we won't get into it. But what we ended up doing for them was exporting their tasks at the start of the week to just a text file. And and that got emailed to them, and they started working on stuff. And then they would just email their lead at the end of the day and said, I did these things. And what we did was create bucket tasks in Jira that we just knew that this was like, we basically did like a day by day. And to this day, I'm not exactly sure, because it wasn't someone just being obstinate. It was, for whatever reason, something about that software just so paralyzed them in being involved with it that they were screwed. We could either try to force the square peg in the round hole and make them incredibly unhappy, or we could find a way around it and shave the edges off for them, which is what we did. And so sometimes you have to do that, but it's worth investigating what it is. And the other thing that I find with that is that people who raise problems with process early, like you say, that Cass is totally right, people need to sit with stuff and kind of ease into it a little bit. But people who raise problems early and continue to raise those same problems throughout, or raise some big new problem with the process, quite often they're just the canaries in the coal mine. For some reason, they're more sensitive to this change than other people, or they are more connected. And this is, like I mentioned earlier, you've got 10 or 15 people or whatever, the number of possible connections is pretty huge. Something about their position inside of that network makes them particularly vulnerable to that change. And they can feel that that's going to screw them. They don't actually know how it's going to screw them yet. It's almost like the sixth sense thing. It's just like somewhere in the project, something is going to go sideways, and I don't like the way that this is moving around me. And so you can go to them and say, what don't you like about this? Why is, and literally sit with them and say, show me how you close a task, you know? And if you see them, like, you know, in Jira, for example, we would build really nice, clean dashboards for everybody. My tasks show up there, the things that are important for me, that's what I know. And if the first thing they do is like open up the search, like they're staring at the entire backlog and they look for the search box to go find the thing, it's like, whoa, okay, let time out. Your workflow seems like it's probably causing you some hassles, you know, and that's just user testing.
Yeah, it's just user testing indeed. Huh. Okay. Yeah. Mikhail, you didn't bring up an interesting point there. What did you mean by production reduces crunch? And does having a game producer actually help prevent crunch culture when it comes to game development?
It really can. It really can. The crunch can happen for a lot of different reasons. The major ones that I've seen, there's external reasons, like the publisher wants it in, wants the game in an unreasonable amount of time, and you have no choice, or the extra things come up. Publisher wants all this marketing material from your team that wasn't discussed, and so you have to address that. But then the internal reasons for crunch, the number one reason that I've seen is really somebody that just goes rogue. A lot of times it can be the director. But it can be somebody else on the team. That's really the main reason I've seen it happen. So it's as a producer, you keep that person very, very close, and that's it's so specific to the person, to how I deal with it, that I don't know if I have just a methodology. But yeah, that's if a more specific question, maybe I can answer.
Yeah. Just on
there's a pandemic. And that really screws everything up.
Yeah, what was it? This is a slight aside, but what was it like shipping in a pandemic?
So there was a couple of problems, and most of them are around what Mikhail described as ABC. So basically, with New Zealand, like, because we're based in Wellington and we're a very small team anyway, us moving to remote was pretty easy. We didn't have to set up any like existing tech stuff. It was pretty much just like, all right, pack up your PCs and take them home. So that side was really smooth. There was obviously the loss of production the loss of productivity as people moved to home, working from home, B, had to adjust to a new style of working, and all the other kind of stuff, normal stuff that happens as soon as something changes. But the biggest trip ups for us were all to do with external stakeholders. So anything platform related takes a lot. Oh my God, I'm so blue now. Anything platform related takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of time in COVID, because the places that do all the testing and do any regulation kind of things, they're also in a lockdown. So they either have like a quarter of the workforce or people working in shifts, or they've closed down. They're not doing anything anymore. So you just have to wait for them to open again. So that was our biggest challenge, is that we'd have like periods where we had to just kind of wait, and then periods where we had to like push out stuff really, really fast, and then periods where we just had to wait, which is pretty much exactly what Mikhail was describing before, except I feel like in this instance, as an example, some of the things that would be projected to take 2 to 3 days in a normal situation took 3 weeks. And there's nothing we could do about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was rough. Yeah. It was really rough as a producer because you're looking at these timelines and you've added your contingency, but you just, like, that's a lot of contingency. Like, that is way more contingency than I feel like anyone, especially for someone who's like, yeah, pretty new to production in general. That was a lot more contingency than I was prepared for. So
I would be shocked if we found any producer at any level of experience that had an appropriate COVID plan.
Yeah.
God, right?
By like, maybe by like end of April. You know,
yeah, yeah, and
like
we moved
maybe?
to working from home in March.
Yeah.
Late March, yeah.
Yeah.
So I went from being like, I'm going to GDC to we're all working from home. We're in a level 4 lockdown within the space of like 3 weeks. So that was great.
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a weird time.
Weird time. Yeah. What a weird world we live in now.
I got laid off in the middle of it. It was real weird.
I know.
We didn't even get to go to the pub and like commisserate and talk crap about you know, our former employers. It was
you want to talk about canaries in the coal mine? I was the start of the lockdown.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Oh, fun time.
Yeah. Since we have like 10 minutes left for the initial meetup, one last question would be, what's the best advice for a budding game producer?
Just real quick. I also have a bunch of questions that got sent to me on Twitter. I don't know if we have.
Yeah. We'll have time for Q&A. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Sorry. What was the question?
What's your best advice for a student learning game production or a budding game producer?
Oh my goodness.
Do a course in product management. I feel like
apart
we don't. No, not apart from that. That like I feel like so many people don't do that as the first step, and I feel like, and I don't mean like a university course. I mean like, you know, you could do a Udemy course, or you could I don't know, read Pinbock or something. Like there's a lot of ways to catch yourself up on, regardless of the people side, just the actual data points for you know, a product life cycle.
Okay.
So yeah, start with that. Start with doing some sort of training, standardized or not, in software and game production if you can.
I think also like work on projects, whether it's your own project or whether it's projects with your friends or fellow students or what have you. Work on those projects, do production on those projects, and do the production properly. Not that I want to insinuate that people are out here half-assing it. Am I allowed to say that? Hopefully. But like I know from experience as a student, it can be easy to, or if you're working on your own projects, it can be easy to get into a thing of like, oh well, I won't do like I won't do like proper sprints or whatever because it's just my own thing. Like if you really want that practice of managing a project, you know, from start to finish, and do finish, that's the important thing. Do not abandon your projects halfway through. See them to the end, finish them, ship them. Is to go into it and have proper sprints. Have, you know, come up with your backlog and break everything down. Have sprints, start those sprints, finish those sprints. I guess you can have sprint. I've never done a sprint review on a team that was just me. So I guess if you're working with one other person, but like do that proper production process. Don't just be like, well, we don't need to do this because it's only like a team of one or whatever. Like that was something that, you know, I did a little bit of with friends, but like even I, who was, you know, I came out of, you know, well, I got hired halfway through studying game dev, but like, you know, when I was doing like production for my friends' stuff, like even I would fall into that thing of like, oh, well, it's just the two of us. We don't need to like get all formal about it, but you should. It's the best practice that you can get.
Okay.
And also I'm not going to like rant for 50 hours on this, but like, don't discount, like not every skill that is going to make you a good producer is going to come from studying game development or from game development. Focus things. Like I've always said, the thing that I think, you know, one of the things that makes me a good producer is that I spent like 9-10 years working in retail management, and so many of the skills that I use as a producer came from managing a team in retail, from learning how to work under pressure, you know, things like that. Like there are so many like skills that you have and life experiences that you have that you probably don't realize are going to be so useful in being a producer. All right, I'm done.
Yeah, I could do a whole thing on like how circus performing helps me make better games, but I won't. That's a whole talk.
You should do
I
a
want to
talk
hear
on
that
that though.
talk.
I want to hear that too.
Yeah, you should do
Yeah.
that talk.
Sign me up.
Alright,
But it's
no.
true. The experiences that, you know, and again, this is my game designer showing, but like you can tell games made by people who only play games. You know,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and they're not often terrible, like often they're fine, but they're very inside baseball, right? They're very reflective of the medium they come from, rather than reflective of necessarily the creative vision of someone or a creative vision of a team. They're the reflected creativity of the medium they exist in. When it comes to the, you know, like, so anyways, you get all these different experiences, but a great example, right? My partner is an incredible producer, and she was a school teacher. And it turns out that managing 12, 30-year-olds is not that different from managing 30, 12-year-olds. Other than the whole, like, you know, managing the whole project structure and stuff, but getting the humans moving in the same direction. Not people are people, whether they're 5 or 50. They have similar desires. So it's very, very true that like the experiences that you have will always assist you if you know what lens to put on them. Couple of recommendations. Clinton Keith's book, what's the actual official name of the new, because the second edition just came out in July and I haven't read it yet, and I should. Agile Game Development, Build, Play, Repeat. Clinton is a really, really experienced agile coach for games. He comes from a background of game development up to like the CTO level for almost 20 years, and then realized that production was where he wanted to be because he was making teams that made cool stuff. He didn't get to write much code anymore anyway, so he's like, screw it, I might as well do the thing that I need to do to make better stuff happen. That's grossly oversimplifying, sorry, Clint, but it kind of true. So I would recommend checking out that. I will strongly second Cal's recommendation of like taking a good project management course. Knowing what a good project management course is going to be tough. So it can't hurt to take a really cheap or free one and get some grounding and stuff. Do you have any specific, was the Udemy one you did good?
Yeah, it was. There's a couple of Udemy ones that are pretty decent, and that kind of like set me up to actually go to scrum.org and use their resources. Don't want to say exactly what it was off the top of the head in case I directed to an incorrect one, but there's one that's like a crash course in Agile, I think it's called, which is a really great one because it's about $10 and it's only like 10 hours, and it gives you a pretty good kind of like real baseline overview. And then there's one that is like very Scrum specific, which would then help you pass a scrum.org certification if that's what you so desire to do. But I can't quite remember the name of that one. I can tweet about it or post them somewhere. But yeah, if you aren't sure, ask a producer friend which one looks most legit or which one they think is the most helpful. And they can probably point you in the right direction.
Something I wish I had done, and I don't even know if this is a thing that exists, it probably does somewhere, is like a course or something, and I still could do this, is learning how to use spreadsheets real good, because spreadsheets are going to be your whole life. And like I can use Google Sheets like pretty good. Excel is not something that I had like a ton of experience going into production with, and just like if you're like really good with spreadsheets, oh, that is like, it's going to be so useful to you. Like I can't even like overstate enough how useful that would have been.
True for game designers as well.
Yeah, spreadsheets. Any game development person, just spreadsheets.
Yeah, it sucks because I hate Excel, but it's true.
Same. I much prefer Google Sheets because I'm terrible. I hope I don't get it. Yeah.
Sheets has actually hit almost better than parity, with the exception of some really niche specific features I never understood how to use anyways in Excel.
I
Mikhail,
love spreadsheets.
Okay. So there's a spreadsheet love, but like, what's your pro tip? You're starting out. Where do you send somebody, man?
Yeah, I mean, if you take care of your team, the team takes care of the game. That's the philosophy that I learned. Learning to do that, that's where I would put my, would put my focus on, aside from learning the logistics of things. So the first rule of taking care of a team is taking care of yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to know what your limits are, because you're going to really, really get pushed. You may very well come into a situation where you're not taking care of yourself, and it's going to start affecting how you are with the team. So there you just got to get to know who you are. That takes, that comes with growth. But with the team, it's all about building trust. They need to trust you, and you need to trust them. Ways of doing it is you ask a lot of questions. A good producer needs to understand that they're the least experienced person in the room in any of the other disciplines. And a way to get everybody on the same page and talking is to ask questions until a conversation is going. And then at that point, you can start to draw connections in front of everybody on a whiteboard or on a digital whiteboard. The other thing is learn how to tell the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. There's a show last year called Chernobyl. And one of the things I like the most about the show, I recommend everybody watches it, is there's two main characters. There's a scientist that knows everything about why Chernobyl is melting. And there's this politician that really doesn't know anything. And they're together in all the scenes, and the scientist goes into every scene and just tells people, you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong. Nobody listens to him. And the politician comes in, says something that's completely non-informative, and everybody does what that person says. Later, when they finally kind of decide to team up, things start to work out. But you need to have both of those skills. You need to have a really solid understanding of everything, which will come from the inquiry. And then you need to have the emotional intelligence and kind of the ability to say something that people don't want to hear. One way of doing it, and this ties back to managing crunch. Sometimes you're gonna see the team get excited about a feature that you already know this is not gonna end well, but you can't jump in and say, guys, no, let's not do this. You chip away at that thing over the course of months and months and months until it's non-existent anymore, and everybody forgot it that it even existed in the first place.
It's sneaky. I just go straight in with no way, so I'm gonna have to learn to be sneaky about it.
It's interesting, like what you were saying about asking questions. Like I reckon, so when I started working as assistant producer at Weta Workshop, I think for probably a good 3 or 4 months, like my biggest fear was asking questions in meetings and stuff, because I was, to be fair, I was the most junior person on the team, and so there was obviously everyone was super nice, don't get me wrong. I'm just looking at James going oh god, James is going to think I was scared of everyone. But I was terrified of sitting in these meeting rooms with all of these people who'd been working in the industry for years and years and years, and looking like an idiot. I was worried, I'm going to ask a question and they're going to realize that I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. And they're gonna boot me out, or they're gonna laugh at me, or they're not going to recognize me as any kind of authority on the project, which I guess is a more valid concern than the other ones. But then I think it was our senior producer that I ended up sitting down with and chatting to him about it, and he said basically exactly what you just said, Mikhail, which was no, you need, a producer needs to ask questions, and he was saying that he always asks questions, even A, if he knows the answer, or B, if he thinks it sounds like the dumbest question ever, because as you were saying, it gets people talking. So just yeah, don't be afraid of asking questions. I get where the fear comes from, but no, don't stress about that.
Okay.
Yeah, and say explain I'm 5.
Yeah.
Helps.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll ask something of a program and they're and you're my background is in art. Do you want to explain it to me I'm 5? And that's been really helpful to me.
Yeah.
Cassie said there were some questions that were for
Yeah. Yeah, so I like retweeted one of my tweets and was like, if anyone has any questions, let me know. Some of them we've already answered. So we got, someone said, how many producers to developers is the right ratio? I think we kind of did the one that I've heard, which I think James touched on, was like one producer for every 10 devs, approximately.
Yeah, approximately, yeah.
I always went with one producer for every 7.
Okay.
But you know, both could work.
Yeah, James, do you?
It just depends on your production structure, right? Like if you've got a very strong production structure that the whole team is bought into, you probably need one really strong producer for even 20 people, but that's contingent on all of the things we've discussed, right? Going well. I don't know that there's necessarily a ratio. I think like the 1 to 7 ratio in terms of 7 people knowing who to talk to is something like that is still super important. Even if that person's not a producer, they need to be somebody who knows what's going on. Or if they don't know what's going on, they know who to ask to make sure that that question is answered in the most timely fashion possible. So somebody like that's team structure and production structure. You can build hierarchies, whatever. There's and it filters down too, right? So like if you're running one of those really big teams, you've got an executive producer who has multiple senior producers underneath them who are all responsible for 5 to 7 of their own producer reports, who then have junior producers below them, and all of that production structure exists to make sure that 700 people move in the same direction. And so like you look at that and you're like, wow, that seems like a lot of project management stuff and producers and things. And it's like, and if you don't have it, stuff goes off the rails so fast that'll make your head spin, and cannot recommend. So I don't know that there's a specific number that's good. It's usually, yeah, like I say, it's about the team. It's about what does the team need to do, what does the team want to do, and if you as a whether you're a person on, if you're on a team, for example, and you're not a producer, you're an artist, a programmer, designer, audio QA, whatever, you're working on, or you're say you're a narrative designer brought on part-time, or whatever the case may be. If something about the production process isn't working for you, you've got to flag that. And then for you as a producer, if someone's coming to you going, hey, I don't know what's going on, that's often your first clue that the production process is shaky, is if you constantly have people saying, I don't really know what I'm doing. Like I know that I'm working on this thing. You asked me to make this model and I'm doing that, but like I don't know where it fits and I don't know if it's right and I don't know who it goes to, and it's like I don't know what's going on. And that manifests in many, many ways, but that's often your first sign that something's wrong. Sometimes that can be fixed through stronger production processes, and sometimes that's a case of you need more producers, or you need more people empowered to be the person who can answer questions, as mentioned before. So it really is project and team dependent, but as whoever the leadership group of that team is, speaking in the sense of larger teams, in smaller teams, 4 to 8 or 4 to 12 or 15 or whatever, then it's probably like the producer and the CEO or whoever that's their job. They're like, all right, and they're the ones who are responsible for that. In larger organizations, then you start to get that point of like, okay, well, we've just crossed 25 people and we still have one producer. Is this gonna work? Probably not, but you won't know until you should know before you get there. And if you don't and you get there and everyone's like, I don't know what's going on, then start with process, consider people.
Yeah. Cal, did you want to add anything?
Honestly, like my experiences so far, of which there have been approximately 3, not including uni, are all with very small teams. So I don't have the experience of being in a team that was over like 10 people beyond like contractors who I have to manage for very, very short amounts of time anyway. So I'm just listening, taking it in.
Cool. So
let me add 2 things if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
One, a good exercise to do is to draw a flow chart of how the communication in your company flows. see if you can even come up with a coherent chart. And if you do, you're going to start to see where, you know, you can start to see where the things fall apart. And the second one is it's good to ramp up your production before you ramp up other teams if you're ramping up significantly. I've had a project where we had to ramp up from 8 to 40 in 2 or 3 months. And we ramped up the production team first, and we were able to onboard people and get them rolling in a week without losing any skill. Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, whereas if you'd hired 40 people and you were still the one producer on it, then you'd be going screaming for more production support, and it's too late. Now you've got to find those people, get them on board to the project, get everything stood up, and you've just lost 3 months.
Exactly.
Cool. The next one I had was, what is the perfect balance between meetings, communication, and focused work in a normal 8-hour workday? Depends who you ask.
Depends on who you ask, indeed.
Anyone have a good answer for that?
This is such a hard question to answer because, like, obviously there are times and there are workplaces where, like, you know, you might be having unnecessary meetings, but like a lot of the time if a meeting is happening, it's because it needs to happen. And I find it so hard to say, like, well, this is how many meetings you should have. I mean, I think the thing that you need to do is just, you know, keep an eye on it and then make adjustments. So, like, for instance, at one place that I worked, there was, you know, we had the 2-week sprints, and there was a feeling that we were having the meetings were encroaching on, you know, the amount of time people had to do their work. So we increased the time of the sprint, and that meant that we had the same amount of meetings but a longer sprint to get work done, and that worked really well for us. And, you know, other things that you can look at is putting in like a focus day, you know, so you might have one day a week or every 2 weeks or whatever where you have no meetings, or like, what do we do at Game Shop, James? We had mornings, right?
Yeah, Monday and Tuesday mornings were blocked from meetings for most people. Yeah.
Not for producers, I imagine.
Not for me, no.
Yeah.
I don't think my time was ever sacred in that place.
Well, it's always like especially like if you're working with an overseas company, like you sort of can't be fussy about when you have meetings.
Yes. Unfortunately, that's the situation that I'm in as well with Starcult, is that we have lots of overseas stakeholders, whether they are contractors or publishers or whatever. And that means that there is very little time that is actually sacred and not for calls. Probably midnight would be uncool. We don't do that. But yeah, it can get kind of earlier in the morning than we would normally start work, etc. Also, same thing as Cass, except so when I first got to Starcult, it was just Bree and Lucy, and I think because of the fact that it was so small, they were kind of doing like a really, really gentle form of production. So they were doing like sort of like 1 week sprints where they're like, at the beginning of the week, they'd be like, okay, we're going to do this. And then at the end of the week, they'd be like, okay, we did that. What are we going to do next week? So it was very soft pre-production, just figuring out what the game was. But as we got a little bit bigger and we got on like writers and a programmer, and, you know, we started to actually, like, you know, that sprint planning actually took up some time. We moved to 2 week sprints instead. So but 1 week sprints was fine for 2 people, you know? So the balance of meetings, I think, totally depends on also like how many people you have in those meetings and how many people are present for every single conversation, because how many people's time you're taking up, and like how long it's going to take to get through that thing, and how granular stuff is. God, I'm slowly falling apart. It's past 8 o'clock, so I need food. Makes a really big difference to that ratio, to that happy ratio. And I would just, I mean, as Cass said, like, try to cut unnecessary meetings, but generally there is no unnecessary meetings.
You can also like look at like meeting hygiene and stuff. So, you know, make sure that you're not like booking out longer time that you need, you know, make sure that you're starting on time. Just, you know, emphasize to people the importance of turning up to meetings on time.
Have an agenda.
Have an agenda. Oh my God. Yeah. Like So I got taught, like, and maybe I shouldn't be laughing at this, but like that you should block out, like you should have your agenda items and then block out, we're going to talk about it from this time to this time, this time to this time. Maybe that is useful in some circumstances. I haven't found it personally because it's hard to stick to that kind of thing, but absolutely have an agenda that allows you to know how much stuff needs to be discussed, and then you can keep an eye on the time. You don't have to be like, oh, it's, you know, it's 10 past 11, we need to move on to the next subject. But you can go, hey, we've only got, say, half an hour for this meeting and we've only talked about one thing, things like that.
That often helps. The other thing that you can, and this again, every team's different, not always saying, but something that we had at Game Shop that we have maintained at NZXR that I'm a big fan of is what we call the guilt-free bail, which is if you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, I really don't need to be here, there's nothing for me to contribute, or I could be doing better things with my time, you just go, guilt-free bail, I'm out, yell at me if you need something, and you bail. And everyone's like, cool, no problem. That means that you were, you know, it was not the best use of your time. It also meant that we would occasionally kind of over invite to meetings. Like we would invite maybe a few more people. We got pretty, or at least I got fairly consistent using the optional tag on meetings as well, to like, partly so that people knew that a meeting existed, not that they necessarily had to be there, but so they're aware of what conversations were happening.
And people are always really good about that. Like we never saw anyone abusing the guilt-free bail option. Like you would never get someone who actually needed to be there going,
like, I'm out.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
You figure it out.
Yeah, no, it's true. Although it has escalated in the era of Zoom where it's turned into perfectly cut screams occasionally where someone's like, guilt-free bail, and then they manage to hit leave while they're like mid-frame, and it's a skill.
Oh my God.
I don't have it.
I miss that change so much sometimes. Mikhail, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and it does change from depending on the size of the company and what team you have. But generally, a few rules to keep meetings in check. The time that you block out for the meeting, you've got to stick to it. So come in with an agenda. At the beginning of the meeting, you say what the purpose of this meeting is. You schedule time for everybody that's coming into the meeting to actually come in prepared with their notes and to know what they're talking about. And you need to leave the meeting with next steps, with action items. You stick to those things, the meetings will have a structure to them. Also, don't joke, even if you think it's going to be really funny, because that's going to take you off a tangent. Don't show, if you're talking about a game, don't start showing clips of it if it's not relevant. Really stay on point. Another thing that has worked for us at GameBand is we try to schedule the meetings. We try to consolidate it so that each person that has to be involved in a meeting has a meeting day or 2 meeting days, and the rest of the week, aside from the stand-ups, they're free. We changed our meeting structure pretty much as we scaled up. We changed and experimented with it a lot, and at some point we actually settled and we had a really good balance. We had a lot of meetings, but it was staggered in a way where people had a lot of time to work as well.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
totally.
so it's possible.
Nice. Cool. So the next one I had was, what is your perspective on the right balance in documentation for a project that is highly iterative?
Simple as you can, but no simpler.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know it's a pretty classic thing for people to think that agile means no documentation because you are, iterating so much. But please document. Please do that.
There's like quite a surprising amount of debate that I see about, not like specifically where I work, but like just in general about like having a GDD versus not having a GDD, or like what you can have in between that, I guess. I don't know, that I find, I don't know, because again, like I don't know, I feel like I graduated yesterday, not that I did, but like, you know, we were taught at uni, obviously because I was studying game design, that like a GDD is the most important thing ever. And then then you actually go and work in places and it's much less, I guess sometimes there's less emphasis put on it than you sort of expect. That you expect it to be like this holy grail document. It's interesting.
Sorry, everybody thinks that at the start.
Okay.
Liz England did a really great talk on documentation, actually. Here I am just being like, hi, I watch lots of talks about things.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
really good.
So I will try and find some way to link that one as well. It's a really short GDC one, and it is basically about documentation being very specifically for who it needs to go to. So documentation as a form of communication with whatever person. So for instance, if it's for someone who only needs to see a flowchart, the documentation is some words with a flowchart, and not waxing lyrical about like what this will mean to the player, just really simple. But it does need to exist, and it does need to exist sometimes differently depending on who's referring to it.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no one right way. Sorry, Mikhail, go ahead.
If you're working remote, documentation is a lot more important than if you're in the studio. A few tips to maintain good documentation is not everybody is good at writing documentation. It shouldn't fall on you as a producer, but it does fall on you to edit it. Make sure the language is very short, and make sure it's written in a way. It's written just with good English. There's so much documentation. It's like nothing but run-on sentences. So the way that we manage it is every person on the team has whatever method that they use for notes. You can standardize it. I like to standardize it, but you don't have to be draconic about it. Those notes go through you and the lead, and then you look at all those notes and put together official documentation that all of the leads agree on. And then that goes into your documentation depot. And that way you keep it, you iterate on it, I'd say once a milestone, or you iterate on it, I'd say once a milestone, or in pre-production a lot more actually. But you need to have that flow where you're filtering it before it gets to the rest of the team. I like keeping good documentation at least until our tools are done and until we're in production. I don't know if it's just pedantic, but I've found that it's really helpful. And the people that are good at writing documentation are also your best communicators on the team. And it's generally part of the process. If you want to be a good communicator, write it down. It's never the same on paper as it is in your head.
Well, that kind of, unless anyone has any extra thoughts about this, it kind of leads into the next question. And we did briefly touch on this, but do you think it's possible to produce a project remotely and working with a completely remote team? What would be the biggest struggle?
You have to do it if you want to make a living now.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like,
yeah,
kind of have to. I think it's possible. I think we've seen it happening. I think that it's certainly a shift. It's a different way of working, and as Mikhail was saying, you do have to get very good at documentation and communication and things like that. But yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I have only worked remotely with Dinosaur Polo Club, with the small team. I didn't get the chance to work remotely with Weta Workshop, and so obviously working with a smaller team and a team that is familiar with one another, because a lot of them had worked together for quite a long time, it's always going to be an easier process than others. They were used to communicating with each other, and so it wasn't that much of a stretch to sort of move that online. The biggest struggle that I think, maybe this isn't the biggest struggle, but one of the struggles that a lot of people would mention a lot, and it's something that I find, because I'm still contracting remotely with them from Australia, is that you lose the casual conversations in the office. And I don't even necessarily mean that in like a casual chats kind of way. I mean, like something that I miss a lot is overhearing people talking about something and going, hey, that's relevant to like whatever project or thing that I'm working on at the moment. And so when you're working remotely, it's really hard to simulate that kind of experience. Like every communication and every chat has to be a deliberate thing of like, hey, I'm going to call you now, or you know, we're going to chat on, you know, Slack. Like Slack conversations are a little bit different, but obviously it's a lot easier to overhear something than to constantly be checking Slack.
One thing that I noticed that I really missed between, you know, moving to work from home is I felt like I was like blinded. Like I felt like I had like blinkers on because I don't know, like when you walk into an office and you are a people person or an observant person in general, you don't need to be a people person. You know, right, that person's sad, that person's coughing, that person's doing this, that person's doing that, that person looks like they haven't gotten sleep, that person, like, it's a lot easier to do, to sort of be a lot more aware of your environment and be able to orient the team when you can kind of get a holistic picture of what's going on and how everyone's feeling, and that's really hard with remote. Particularly people don't turn their cameras on, which I'm totally guilty of. If I'm looking like crap in the morning, I don't turn my camera on, and then, you know, no one can see my face. I can be like, woo, you know, but other people could be doing that and they could be having an absolutely miserable time. So yeah, it really, I feel like for me particularly, I felt like I lost a lot of my kind of like touch points on the team as a whole when we moved to working from home. That's not to say that it's bad. I think that there's definitely a lot of benefits to working from home. And I feel like, yeah, like Mikhail said, it's probably something that we should all get used to. But there are definitely some losses there, and I'm not sure how you would get around them.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, like you're right. It is so tough to, because, you know, you can hope that people will come and talk to you, but it's so much easier to just walk into a place and yeah, like the only thing I can see around that, and it is so hard to, like, this takes so much time to develop this kind of thing, but is to hopefully, and this isn't like, this is just in general, this isn't to say that you guys haven't done this, but like, is to cultivate the kind of studio where people are comfortable like speaking up if something, but that's not even like, you know, you can have the best studio culture in the world and sometimes people just are not going to volunteer what's going on in their personal life. Like, you're right, it's such a tough thing to not see people's faces every day and see how they're going from that.
Mikhail's probably got some very specific information about this because he's been through this a lot more than most of us. But one thing I would suggest for trying to maintain that health is know who's got your one-on-ones, right? So everybody should have one-on-ones, so that you've got someone who's your touch point all the, you know, bi-weekly, whatever the cadence is that you decide, but make sure somebody's got that. And then if team health is one of your responsibilities as a producer, which it often is, but not always. But if team health is your concern, know who's got who's one-on-ones, and you don't have to know the information on those one-on-ones. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that vibe. How's the vibe? Are they okay? You know, hey, how that one-on-one you had with, you know, Gloria last week? Everything's cool. You don't need to ask specifics. You don't need to ask like all the information. That's really, it's personal. It's to that one-on-one. But you go, everything's cool, and what you get back is, oh yeah, no, everything's good. And if you've got the trust, then you can trust that that's cool. It actually, you know, they're kind of worried about this. Oh, shoot, I didn't know anybody was worried about that. Okay, and that's kind of how you can surface that information a little bit, and that can bubble up through your one-on-ones, or laterally through your one-on-ones. But that's one way of kind of approaching that, is to have that information flow. But I want to get on Mikhail's way because I want to hear.
Experience.
I don't know. This is something I'm struggling with right now. So I went from working in a studio on projects that take, you know, between 2 to 3 years, to working completely remote. I'm here in New Zealand. The teams I work with are in North America and the UK. Some of them I've never met before in person, and it's all remote, different time zones, and it is a shift. the one-on-ones, like James said, is very important. Having weekly calls, checking in with everybody day on Slack. We're able to I feel like the teams are functioning, but I really am missing that camaraderie. And it does get, if you're responsible for so many people, without getting feedback from them, it gets very lonely, is what I've found out. So that's, what I said about keeping them functioning, checking in on Slack. I use Notion a lot. We basically, all my teams now use Slack and Notion, and we use them a little bit differently. So Slack is for more casual conversations, talking about when we're meeting up, anything that's related to meetings. And Notion is where we do all of our technical conversation. And it's divided into the actual ticket or the features of where it is in the database. And I found that cleans up the entire conversation process, where you must know when you have a Slack and it's just like endless channels and like multiple DMs and you don't know where to find anything. It cleans that whole thing up. So that's something that's been working out for us. I try to do more one-on-ones with the leads and kind of get a sense of their personality, but I find that it's a lot harder. Some of them, very easy. They want to do the one-on-ones, they want to talk about their lives. Those are the people that are very easy to keep a connection with. There are people that don't want, they're just loners. I recognize it being a loner as well. They don't want you in their business. With those sorts of people, I really just stick to business. I found that doing one-on-ones with them isn't very helpful. They just want to do their jobs and then do their thing, and that works too. So it's a bit of evaluating, it's a different way of evaluating the personality. If anybody learns anything, I could also use some advice here too.
I've only got a couple more questions, and one of them we've sort of actually answered already. And this one I'm not 100% sure what the question's getting at. It says, how much programming knowledge is it reasonable to accept from a producer? I'm not sure if it means to say expect from a producer or...
Probably
yeah, I'm guessing,
expect.
Yeah, expect, or assuming they're like going to a DevOps role or something along those lines.
Yeah,
which...
or unless they're asking like, how much programming knowledge can a producer give to... I don't know.
I think it's really comes out to all disciplines, right? It's like, as a producer, how much game design do you need to know? How much art do you need to be able to do? How much? And the answer is almost none of any of those things. Yeah. What you have to be able to do is communicate with those disciplines. And over time, your experience with them and, again, the trust factor will help you understand whether people are bullshitting you or not. Because, and it's rare. At least in my experience, it's generally rare. And if it's not, or if it's happened more than once, it's usually the same person. People are generally professionals. They want to get stuff done. So I don't think it's necessary to have those skills. However, it is hugely advantageous to, not hugely, but it is advantageous to have some other experience. Like, just like we talked about earlier about the life skills that you've got making you a more effective producer. I mean, Cal, you've talked about doing art and marketing stuff in it as well. And that's probably, I imagine, quite valuable, not just for the studio to be able to produce those assets, but also for you as a producer. You're looking at it going,
totally.
How am I juggling this?
Yeah, so I can totally, so for me, it's really easy for me to do production for art pipelines, right? I mean, yeah, there's like, obviously I have to still kind of keep up with any sort of technical advancement that might make pipelines smoother and things like that. But for the most part, I kind of like, I know how I would do the process. So I kind of have like a baseline assumption in my head, and then that can be iterated on and make sense to me. Whereas for a programmer, like the most I can do is like some blueprints and Unreal. I'm not a programmer. So our programmer Brandon will will give me some sort of like explanation or a kind of like, oh, it might take this much time because of this and that. And yeah, like I said before, I have to say that you don't do the explain like a vibe. And I don't think that we should be asking producers to know how to code. I think that we should be asking them to be a little bit more aware of pipelines. But like, I don't think you should be like expecting your producer to be able to do any of the things that they're producing. That's not their job.
I agree with James. Basically, I studied game design at uni, which meant that I got, and well, obviously I learned some game design, but I got an overview. We did like a unit of art, we did a unit of programming, and I'm a terrible artist. Well, terrible 3D, like digital artist. I'm an okay programmer, but I haven't done it for about 400 years, so I don't remember most of it. But like that was enough to give me a background in things so that I could talk to people. Like that was it's, I guess it would be useful to have more information because you can have even more in-depth conversations, but I don't think it's necessarily necessary. And like I think it also, you don't want to fall into that thing of, and most people won't do this, but you need to remember, I guess, that the reason that the programmers have been hired as programmers is because they're the ones with that expertise, right? And same for art and same for other disciplines. You don't want to fall into that thing of like trying to offer too much advice because they will not appreciate it.
No. So I'm guessing, essentially it's just like a nice baseline of communication across all disciplines. So the game producer is what they should really have.
Yeah, I got like my studies gave me enough information that like when I started listening to people from different disciplines talking about things, I knew I could understand what they were talking about, and then I just sort of learned from there, right? Like you just pick things up as you hear people having the conversation.
And it's also different everywhere you go, that you're going to have a learning curve no matter what you do.
Exactly. So the last question I had, which we did touch on pretty extensively, was at what point do you move from pre-production prototyping to full production?
Classic.
Yeah,
Classic.
we kind of already had that conversation. I don't know if we ever actually said a distinct point, this is when you should move, but I also don't think there is one. There's not a definitive answer. It's not like after 8 weeks of pre-production, you should move to production.
I think Mikhail said like had a pretty good kind of like checkpoint mark for how much you need to be able to prepare in order to be able to move smoothly in. If you'd like to reiterate.
Yeah, so you divide your pre-production into 2 phases, one where you're figuring out what you're doing and one where you're figuring out how you're going to do it. And you want to, basically the tricky phase is when you're figuring out what you're doing. In order to support that process, you kind of do a scientific method where when you iterate, you have to have a hypothesis. This is where documentation is actually really, really valuable. You write down what your hypothesis is, what your pillars are, what are you trying to achieve with this version of the prototype, what you expect the results are going to be. And then you build it as quickly as you can, You test it with a player, and then you see what results you actually got and how far are they from your results, and whether you need to change your hypothesis. I would do that. Generally, the games I work on, they have kind of like a 2-year, it seems like the schedule for the games I'm working on, they're around 2 years now. So what I try to do is 8 months of pre-production in a schedule like that, where 4 months is how are we doing it? 4 months is figuring it out. 2 months of vertical slice, and then the rest is production and ABC.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's I often look at it as like a ratio thing, and it's sort of, you want to front load the pre-pro process as much as you can. So like if you've got X amount of time, 50% to figure out what you're doing and get ready to do it. 30% give or take to do it and get a lot of it wrong, but hopefully produce as much of it as you can. And then that last 20% is finishing it off. And then it starts all over again once you go into live ops. But that's quite a different thing, and Cass touched on that briefly as well. and there's a specialization in production that we didn't talk much about, which is like live ops or DevOps producer, which is a whole other like degree of granularity and specificity, because now the whole engine is there and it's working, hopefully, and your job is to keep the engine working so that the game continues to be updated, and that's all about refinement and in fact, it's more about refinement and just shaving off rough edges everywhere you can, so that the team can consistently be hitting whatever the release schedule is for whatever type of thing you're doing. But live ops is, it's not something I have any real experience in. I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that regard, but it's kind of intense just how different those roles are. I've talked to plenty of people who do it, and I'm just like, it's one of those ones where until you've gone and done it yourself, probably hard to grok.
Yeah. Totally, like, wow, like live ops, amazing. How do you live?
That's
how do you cope?
honestly,
how do you plan around something that's constantly just going in a circle?
That's the one of the number one things I've heard from a lot of people in that space, is that the people who enjoy it are the ones who have usually figured out how to set their boundaries very carefully for themselves and their team, so that they are, I think Cass's example of like making it a mini release, like it has its own structure. It's not you don't want it to feel like a continuous grind for everyone involved in the process, where you're just grinding out content again and again. You want to have that moment to celebrate success, right? Shipping is a success because the fact that it ever happens is a friggin' miracle. And so you take a minute and celebrate that before you move on to the next one, rather than getting trapped in treacle of every day is a new cosmetic release.
Yeah, that was all the questions that
that was all the questions
I had.
Yeah. So I guess we can wrap this up real quick. So where can the viewers see you guys on social media?
I am mostly on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Cass Jade Gray. It's JADEGRAY at the end. It's the best place to find me.
Okay.
I'm Calliope Ryder. It's just at the same as Cass. It's on Twitter. It's where we all hang out, I think. At CALLIOPERYDER. That's me.
Okay.
I'm at James E on Twitter, and I'm terrible at Twitter these days. I used to be a pro back when that was a thing you could be, and circa 2010 I gave up. But yes, I'm occasionally on there, and I can be found there, and ping me and I'll say hi.
Okay.
I have a Twitter account, but I haven't used it in, I think I posted like 3 things on it. I'm not really on social media, but if you want to get in touch with me, you can use email, which I know it's old and I don't like it myself, but it is the best way to reach me. You can just hit me up at m@michaelfalek.com. You can try my Twitter. If maybe I'll get a message like, what was that? And it's just at Michael Falek, but I really don't know when's the last time I left on it.
Okay.
2016.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
I'm proud of.
That's 2016 was kind of a good time to get off Twitter.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that is like.
It's the end of the good days.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having us, Josh.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for attending the